Game of Thrones books in order, the twists and the divergences. British GQ. It's easy to forget, considering we've not seen one since 2011, but Game of Thrones is also a series of books. We recap the biggest. Way back in 1996, fantasy were for nerds. That was beyond question. In 2019, the one that started it all off, and, boy, does it feel like it was a long time ago. Jon and the other Starks, they were still all canonically Starks back then, and all alive and well, find their dire wolves. Ned is troubled. Across the sea, Dany is a 15-year-old Yeb. They sensibly changed that for the TV show, traded between Illyrio Mopedus and Khal Drogo, a pseudo-Venetian and pseudo-Mongol respectively. She even has the biggest twist. Two of the biggest of the series come in the last few chapters. First, the George R.R. Martin stepped it up with Clash. As the War of the Five, ACOK is also the first book where Tyrion really gets a chance to shine, plotting to undermine Cersei's power and to shield a now defenseless Sansa Stark from Joffrey's wanton cruelty. In the course of the war, meanwhile, Dany leads the remnants of Drogo's Khalasar across the massive open steppes of Essos and heads to Qarth, where she drinks a potion and has a series of visions in the House of the Undying, which, to this day, provoke deeply passionate textual debate on particular subreddits. Jon Snow had biggest twist. Renly Baratheon is killed before he even really gets going, but it's his means of assassination that really stand out, knifed by a shadow baby birthed by Stannis Red Witch Melisandre. There's also things go south for the Starks, beginning with Catelyn's decision to free a captured Jaime Lannister and send him back to his family under the guard of Brienne of Tarth, and ending with her and Robb and all the Stark bannermen being filled with crossbow bolts at the Red Wedding. Another king is Margaery Tyrell is betrothed to Joffrey, and the wedding goes as well as the earlier one. Joffrey chokes to death on poison in what has become the series' most satisfying scene and one of the rare moments in literature where readers found themselves cackling with glee at the death of a child. Tyrion is accused. There's a good deal of aimless wandering around in A Storm of Swords. Arya and the Hound. Biggest twist, the Red Wedding, obviously. Honorable mention, potentially the dark horse of the series so far, given it has POV chapters from such left-field characters as Aerion, Areo-Hotah, Aeron, and Victarion Greyjoy. Basically everyone who the TV show neglected or excised completely. It was also split, but it was also the first time we got into Cersei's head. We had POV. Tommen becomes Boy King, Myrcella is badly injured in Dorne, and Doran Martell finally plays his cards, revealing all along that he was a Targaryen loyalist and that his son Quentyn has been sent east to find Dany and bring her home. Jaime and Cersei. Biggest twist. Nearly all the twists in A Feast for Crows are slow-burning character developments, so there aren't many single shock moments. The Grand Dornish. This is the moment things get weird, if you've only seen the show. Everything gets chopped at the wall. Jon does his best as Lord Commander of the Watch, balancing various factions and inviting the wildlings into Westeros. This goes badly. Dany continues much as before, fighting entrenched interests and conspiracies in Slaver's Bay. Her otherwise bland. As for Tyrion, he escapes Westeros after Tywin's murder, heads to Essos and spends much of the novel getting drunk on a barge. Diversions like this are why fans doubt Martin will ever finish his series. He does. Biggest twist, Aegon Targaryen is still alive. Jon Snow is dead. Now read Game of Thrones Season 7. Game of Thrones Season 7.
Raindrop, drip, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that.